What if I told you that your belief in an objective, unchangeable reality, independent of your consciousness, is actually the greatest illusion ever perpetrated upon the human psyche? What if the very fabric of existence responds to the depths of your unconscious mind in ways that would make the most accomplished stage magician weep with envy? For decades, I have observed thousands of patients who insisted they were victims of circumstance, trapped by immutable laws of physics and social conditioning, only to discover that their deepest psychological transformations literally restructured the events, relationships, and opportunities that manifested in their external world. The quantum physicists have now proven what the mystics and depth psychologists have always known: consciousness and reality are inextricably intertwined, and the observer fundamentally alters what is observed. But here's what will shatter your conventional understanding: you are not merely observing reality, you are continuously creating it through the interplay between your conscious intentions and the vast, powerful currents of your unconscious mind. The moment you truly comprehend this, you'll never approach your life circumstances the same way again. Most people don't realize they are living as psychological prisoners within a reality they themselves have unconsciously constructed. They wake each morning convinced that the world simply happens to them, that their circumstances are the result of external forces beyond their control, never recognizing that their deepest beliefs, fears, and unconscious patterns are continuously broadcasting energetic signatures that literally attract corresponding experiences. What does this imprisonment look like? First, they experience chronic powerlessness, always reacting to situations rather than creating them, feeling like victims of circumstance rather than architects of experience. Second, they remain trapped in repetitive cycles, the same relationship conflicts, the same financial struggles, the same health challenges, wondering why these patterns persist despite their conscious efforts to change. Third, they suffer from what I call consensus reality hypnosis, accepting limitations that others have programmed into their minds about what's possible, what they deserve, and how the world supposedly works. Fourth, they live in constant anxiety about the future because they believe they have no real influence over what unfolds, making them feel helpless and reactive rather than proactive and creative. Fifth, they experience a profound disconnection from their authentic power, settling for mediocrity because they've been conditioned to believe that extraordinary results require extraordinary luck or circumstances they don't possess. These symptoms compound in devastating ways. The powerlessness creates more experiences that reinforce powerlessness. The repetitive cycles become deeper grooves in the psyche, making escape seem increasingly impossible. The consensus reality hypnosis strengthens as they surround themselves with others who share the same limiting beliefs, creating echo chambers of limitation. Studies in quantum physics and psychology demonstrate that over 95% of people live their entire lives within the same basic reality construct they internalized before age 7, never questioning whether alternative possibilities exist. The hidden costs are staggering: decades of unfulfilled potential, relationships that never reach their true depth, creative gifts that remain undeveloped, and a constant underlying sense that life is happening to them rather than through them. This is why conventional positive thinking approaches fail so miserably. They attempt to change surface thoughts while leaving the deep unconscious programming completely intact, like trying to change a river's direction by stirring the surface with a stick while ignoring the powerful currents flowing beneath. I promise you 5 proven, scientifically backed methods to fundamentally alter your relationship with reality itself, transforming you from a passive observer into what I call a quantum magician, someone who consciously participates in the creation of their experience through the sophisticated integration of depth psychology and quantum principles. These aren't mere mental tricks or wishful thinking exercises, but profound psychological technologies that have been validated by decades of analytical psychology research, quantum physics discoveries, and the documented experiences of individuals who have successfully transcended ordinary limitations. The most successful individuals throughout history, from Einstein to Tesla, from Jung himself to modern pioneers in consciousness research, have all understood and applied these same fundamental principles, though they may have described them in different languages. What distinguishes these quantum magicians from ordinary people isn't superior intelligence or favorable circumstances, but their ability to work consciously with the mysterious interface between mind and reality, between the psychological and the physical. When you master these 5 methods, you'll never approach challenges, relationships, or opportunities the same way again. You'll begin to notice that external circumstances shift in response to internal changes with an almost supernatural precision. You'll discover that what you once considered fixed limitations were actually flexible boundaries that respond to properly applied psychological pressure. The transformation isn't just in how you think about reality, it's in how reality actually responds to your transformed consciousness, creating what can only be described as a completely different life experience within the same physical world. But here's what most people miss about the fundamental nature of reality creation. They approach it from the ego's limited perspective, rather than understanding that true reality manipulation occurs through what I call the transcendent function, the bridge between conscious and unconscious processes. Think of reality as a vast ocean, and most people believe they are tiny boats at the mercy of waves and currents beyond their control. But this metaphor reveals only half the truth. In quantum reality, you are simultaneously the boat, the ocean, and the consciousness observing both. Your ego mind is like the visible tip of an iceberg, while your unconscious contains the massive psychological structures that actually determine what manifests in your experience. Consider how a radio works. It doesn't create radio waves, but by tuning to specific frequencies, it can receive entirely different programs. Your consciousness operates similarly. It doesn't create reality from nothing, but by aligning with different psychological frequencies, it can access entirely different probability streams and potential outcomes. The scientific backing for this comes from quantum field theory, which demonstrates that particles exist in states of infinite possibility until consciousness collapses them into specific manifestations. Dr. Amit Goswami's research in quantum consciousness shows that consciousness is fundamental to physical reality, not an emergent property of brain activity. But here's the revolutionary insight. This collapse of possibility into actuality occurs not just in physics laboratories, but continuously in your daily life through the unconscious psychological choices you make moment by moment. Your deep beliefs about yourself others, and reality function as quantum observation devices, continuously selecting which possibilities become manifest from the infinite field of potential. When this process works in reverse, when you're unconsciously aligned with limitation, fear, and scarcity, you create what I call negative magic. Think about someone who unconsciously believes they don't deserve love. They will consistently attract partners who confirm this belief, not through conscious choice, but through subtle, energetic signals that draw unavailable people while repelling those capable of genuine intimacy. Or consider someone with deep financial scarcity programming. They will unconsciously make decisions that sabotage financial abundance, missing opportunities that are clearly as if reality itself conspires to confirm their limiting beliefs. This isn't punishment from the universe. It's the precise psychological mechanism by which consciousness creates corresponding experiences. Think about a time when you desired something intensely, then forgot about it completely, only to have it manifest weeks or months later in the most unexpected way. This is your unconscious mind operating as a quantum field organizer, arranging circumstances beyond your ego's capacity to orchestrate. The key insight is learning to work consciously with this process rather than leaving it to random unconscious programming inherited from childhood, society, and past experiences. The second critical understanding involves what I call psychological alchemy, the transformation of unconscious limitations into conscious creative power. Most people approach personal development like spiritual materialism, trying to acquire new techniques and insights while leaving their fundamental psychological structure unchanged. But here's what the mystics and depth psychologists have always known. Real transformation requires a complete reorganization of the psyche itself, a death and rebirth process that dissolves the old identity and births a new mode of being. This isn't about positive thinking or visualization techniques. Those operate from the ego's limited perspective. Psychological alchemy involves descending into the unconscious, confronting what I call the shadow aspects of your personality, and integrating them into a more complete psychological wholeness. When someone says, I want to manifest abundance while unconsciously harboring guilt about money, fear of success, or beliefs about their unworthiness, they create internal contradictions that block manifestation. It's like having one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake. The energy cancels itself out. The scientific mechanism behind this involves what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on new experiences and mental patterns. But most people try to create this rewiring from the conscious mind alone, which controls less than 5% of mental activity. Real transformation occurs when you access the unconscious programming running in the background and update it at the source level. This requires what I call active imagination, a sophisticated psychological technique where you consciously engage with unconscious material through symbols, images, and inner dialogue. Consider how programming works in computers. Surface-level applications depend on deeper operating systems, which depend on even deeper hardware architecture. Your conscious thoughts are like applications, your unconscious beliefs are like the operating system, and your deepest psychological structures, what I call your personal mythology, function like the hardware that determines what's possible within your reality system. Most people try to change their lives by installing new applications while leaving corrupted operating systems untouched. Psychological alchemy involves rewriting the operating system itself. The process begins with what I call psychological honesty, the willingness to examine your life circumstances as perfect reflections of your unconscious programming rather than random external events. Every relationship, every financial situation, every health challenge contains precise information about the unconscious beliefs operating below conscious awareness. When you become detective of your own psychological patterns, tracking the connections between inner states and outer manifestations, you begin developing what I call reality literacy, the ability to read the symbolic language through which your unconscious communicates with conscious awareness. Common mental blocks that prevent this transformation include the ego's need to maintain its current identity, fear of the unknown psychological territory that authentic transformation requires, resistance to taking full responsibility for life circumstances, and what I call spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid the difficult psychological work of genuine self-examination. The antidote involves cultivating what I call conscious suffering, the willingness to feel and transform psychological pain rather than avoiding it through various escape mechanisms. The third method involves mastering what I call synchronicity engineering, the ability to work consciously with meaningful coincidences to accelerate manifestation and navigate life with supernatural precision. Elite performers in every field, from business titans to artistic geniuses, have learned to recognize and follow synchronistic patterns, though they may not use this language to describe their process. Steve Jobs called it connecting the dots, while Einstein referred to spooky action at a distance, but they were all pointing to the same mysterious phenomenon, the universe's tendency to organize apparently random events into meaningful patterns that support conscious intention. The brain science behind synchronicity involves what neuroscientists call the reticular activating system, a neurological network that filters reality based on what your consciousness has determined as important or relevant. When you set a clear intention backed by genuine emotional intensity, your RAS begins noticing opportunities, resources, and connections that were always present but previously invisible to conscious awareness. But here's where most people misunderstand the process. They try to force synchronicity through ego-driven effort, rather than creating the psychological conditions that allow it to emerge naturally. Research in quantum entanglement demonstrates that particles can influence each other instantaneously across vast distances, suggesting that reality operates more like a holographic field than a collection of separate objects. Your consciousness participates in this field, sending out energetic signatures that attract corresponding experiences through what I call morphic resonance, the tendency for similar psychological patterns to find and reinforce each other across space and time. When you align your conscious intention with your unconscious programming, you create what physicists might call coherent resonance, dramatically amplifying your ability to attract synchronistic support. The step-by-step implementation begins with what I call intention crystallization, the process of clarifying exactly what you want to create in language that resonates with both conscious and unconscious levels of mind. This isn't about setting goals in the conventional sense, but about discovering what wants to emerge through you based on your deepest authentic nature. Most people set intentions from social conditioning or ego desires rather than listening to what I call the voice of the self, the deeper wisdom that knows your true purpose and highest potential. Second, you must cultivate what I call relaxed focus, a state of alert receptivity where you remain open to how your intention might manifest rather than forcing specific outcomes. This requires developing tolerance for uncertainty and trusting that the universe's intelligence operates beyond the ego's limited perspective. Third, you practice what I call sign literacy, learning to recognize and interpret the symbolic communications through which reality provides guidance and confirmation. This isn't about superstitious thinking, but about developing sensitivity to the subtle patterns that connect inner psychological movements with outer manifestations. Fourth, you must learn to act on synchronistic promptings even when they don't make logical sense to the rational mind. This requires developing what I call intuitive courage, the willingness to follow inner guidance even when it contradicts conventional wisdom or social expectations. Fifth, you practice what I call grateful completion, acknowledging and appreciating synchronistic support when it appears, which reinforces the neurological patterns that recognize and attract further synchronicity. Common mistakes include trying to control how intentions manifest rather than remaining open to unexpected pathways, dismissing meaningful coincidences as random chance due to overly materialistic conditioning, forcing actions before receiving clear inner guidance, and abandoning the process when synchronicity doesn't occur within expected timeframes. The most successful practitioners develop what I call patient urgency, maintaining intense commitment to their vision while allowing sufficient time for the invisible organizing forces to arrange optimal circumstances. The timing typically involves setting clear intentions during periods of psychological clarity and emotional stability, remaining alert to synchronistic signals throughout daily activities, and taking inspired action when opportunities align with inner guidance. The frequency of practice involves daily attention to the synchronistic dimension of experience, weekly review of meaningful coincidences and their connections to conscious intentions, and periodic, deeper sessions of intention refinement based on emerging insights and changing life circumstances. The compounding effect occurs as your nervous system becomes increasingly sensitive to synchronistic patterns, creating what I call a synchronicity feedback loop, where meaningful coincidences occur with increasing frequency and precision. Over time, this develops into what can only be described as a fundamentally different way of navigating reality, one where you move through life with an almost supernatural sense of timing, connection, and opportunity recognition that others interpret as extraordinary luck, but which is actually sophisticated psychological technology applied consistently over time. The fourth method involves what I call quantum identity shifting, a systematic process for reorganizing your fundamental self-concept to align with the reality you want to create rather than the limitations you've inherited from past conditioning. This isn't about pretending to be someone you're not, but about discovering and embodying your authentic potential that has been obscured by layers of social programming and psychological protection mechanisms. The system works through what I call identity archaeology, excavating the deep psychological structures that determine how you see yourself, others, and reality itself. Most people's identities are unconscious collections of other people's opinions, social expectations, past failures, and childhood survival strategies, rather than authentic expressions of their true nature. These borrowed identities function like psychological prisons, limiting what seems possible and attracting experiences that confirm existing self-concepts. The technical mechanism involves understanding that identity operates like a filtering system that determines which thoughts, feelings, and behaviors feel natural and which feel foreign or impossible. When someone identifies as someone who struggles with money, their nervous system will automatically reject opportunities, sabotage success, or find ways to return to familiar financial stress because anything else feels psychologically threatening to their existing self-concept. The brain interprets identity changes as survival threats and will fight to maintain psychological consistency, even when that consistency involves suffering. The step-by-step process begins with what I call identity inventory, examining your current self-concept through the lens of observable results rather than conscious beliefs about yourself. Your relationships, financial situation, health, and life circumstances provide accurate mirrors of your unconscious identity programming. If you consistently attract unavailable partners, your identity includes unconscious programming about not deserving love or fears of genuine intimacy. If you struggle with money despite conscious effort, your identity contains scarcity programming that operates below conscious awareness. Second, you practice what I call identity experimentation, temporarily trying on different self-concepts to discover which ones feel authentic and which ones reveal limiting programming. This involves asking questions like, what would someone who effortlessly attracts abundance think about this situation? Or how would someone who feels deserving of love handle this relationship challenge? The key is observing which alternative identities create expansion and which create contraction in your nervous system. Third, you engage in what I call identity integration rituals, specific practices that help embody new self-concepts at the subconscious level. This might involve visualization practices where you see yourself consistently succeeding from your new identity, journaling from the perspective of your evolved self, or making decisions throughout the day based on your emerging rather than historical identity. Fourth, you practice what I call identity consistency, aligning your thoughts, words, and actions with your new self-concept, even when it feels unfamiliar or challenging. The before scenario typically involves someone trapped in repetitive patterns that confirm limiting self-concepts, feeling like they're trying to change from the outside in rather than the inside out, experiencing internal resistance to taking actions that successful people would naturally take, and feeling like they're pretending or being inauthentic when they attempt to embody a more empowered identity. The after scenario involves someone who naturally thinks, feels, and acts from an empowered self-concept, attracts opportunities and relationships that match their evolved identity, experiences internal alignment between their authentic desires and their sense of what's possible, and moves through life with a confidence that feels genuine rather than forced, because it emerges from deep identity transformation rather than surface-level positive thinking. The transformation scenarios demonstrate how identity shifts create different realities. Consider someone who shifts from identifying as someone who struggles with relationships to someone who attracts and maintains healthy love. This isn't just a thought change, it involves transforming deep psychological structures that determine attachment patterns, communication styles, boundary setting, and unconscious partner selection. The new identity attracts different people, creates different relationship dynamics, and generates different outcomes because the entire psychological framework has shifted. Sabotage prevention involves recognizing that the ego will attempt to maintain familiar identity structures even when they're limiting because familiarity feels safer than growth. Common sabotage patterns include reverting to old self-concepts during stress or challenge, surrounding yourself with people who reinforce your old identity, making decisions based on who you used to be rather than who you're becoming, and abandoning identity shifts when they require sustained effort rather than instant results. The antidote involves what I call identity anchoring, creating environmental and social supports that reinforce your evolving self-concept while gradually reducing exposure to influences that pull you back toward limiting identities. The fifth method involves what I call reality scripting through embodied action, using specific physical practices to create immediate shifts in consciousness while building momentum toward larger transformations. While mental and emotional work provides the foundation, physical action creates the bridge between inner change and outer manifestation, because the body exists at the intersection of consciousness and material reality. The power of physical action lies in what neuroscientists call embodied cognition, the recognition that mental states and physical states are inextricably linked. When you change your physiology, you automatically alter your psychology, and when you change your psychology through physical practice, you create new neurological pathways that support different thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. But here's what most people miss: the specific type of physical action matters enormously, because different movements and practices activate different aspects of consciousness and create different types of energetic resonance with reality. Ancient traditions understood this principle deeply. The Egyptian mystery schools used specific physical postures and movements to induce altered states of consciousness that allowed initiates to access higher wisdom and develop supernatural abilities. Hindu and Buddhist yogic practices involve precise physical techniques designed to awaken dormant consciousness potentials and create harmony between individual awareness and cosmic intelligence. Modern research in somatic psychology demonstrates that psychological trauma and limitation are stored in the body's tissues and nervous system, and that appropriate physical practices can release these restrictions while installing new patterns of empowerment. The multiple implementation options allow you to customize your practice based on your temperament, lifestyle, and specific goals. The first option involves what I call power posturing, adopting specific physical positions that naturally generate confidence, clarity, and creative energy. Research by Dr. Amy Cuddy demonstrates that holding expansive postures for just 2 minutes can increase testosterone levels by 19%, while decreasing cortisol by 25%, creating immediate shifts in confidence and stress resilience. But beyond these biochemical changes, certain postures also activate what I call archetypal energies, deep psychological patterns that connect you with universal powers of creativity, leadership, and manifestation. The second option involves conscious breathing patterns, specific rhythmic practices that regulate nervous system activation, while creating altered states of consciousness that enhance intuition and manifestation ability. Different breathing patterns activate different branches of the autonomic nervous system. Short, sharp breaths increase alertness and energy, while long, slow breaths activate parasympathetic relaxation and receptivity. Advanced practitioners learn to use breathing as a tool for consciousness navigation, shifting between different mental states as needed for optimal creativity and decision-making. The third option involves movement meditation, flowing physical practices that integrate body, mind, and spirit, while creating energetic momentum that supports towards manifestation. This might include walking meditation in nature, expressive dance that releases emotional blocks, martial arts forms that cultivate focused intention, or yoga sequences designed to activate specific energy centers and psychological qualities. The key is moving with conscious intention rather than mindless exercise, treating physical action as a form of prayer or magic that communicates your desires to the universe through embodied demonstration. Historical validation for these practices spans virtually every wisdom tradition. The Sufi whirling dervishes use spinning movements to achieve mystical union with divine consciousness. Tibetan monks developed complex physical practices that reportedly allowed them to control body temperature, levitate, and manifest psychic abilities. Native American vision quests involve specific physical challenges and nature immersion designed to induce prophetic dreams and spiritual guidance. Even modern elite performers unconsciously use embodied practices. Athletes visualize perfect performance while physically rehearsing movements. Business leaders adopt confident postures before important meetings, and artists use specific physical environments and rituals to access creative flow states. Cultural validation appears in traditions worldwide that recognize dance movement and physical ritual as technologies for consciousness transformation and reality creation. The Aboriginal Australians use walkabout journeys and ceremonial dances to maintain connection with the dream time, their understanding of the consciousness dimension that underlies physical reality. African traditions employ drumming, chanting, and synchronized movement to induce trance states that allow communication with ancestral wisdom and future possibilities. These aren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated technologies for accessing non-ordinary consciousness and influencing reality through embodied intention. The immediate engagement opportunity involves choosing one physical practice that resonates with your current life situation and committing to consistent implementation for at least 30 days. This might be as simple as beginning each day with 2 minutes of power posturing while setting clear intentions, or as complex as developing a comprehensive movement meditation practice that integrates multiple consciousness-altering techniques. The key is starting with something that feels manageable while creating enough challenge to generate real momentum and results. The momentum building explanation reveals why physical action is often more powerful than mental work alone. Action creates evidence that change is possible, which builds confidence and motivation for continued transformation. When you consistently engage in empowering physical practices, you begin experiencing yourself as someone who takes powerful action rather than someone who merely thinks about change. This identity shift creates a positive feedback loop where empowering actions feel increasingly natural while disempowering patterns feel increasingly foreign and uncomfortable. Timing recommendations vary based on individual circadian rhythms and lifestyle constraints, but most people find that morning practices create foundation energy for the entire day, while evening practices help integrate daily experience and prepare the unconscious mind for overnight processing and guidance. Frequency suggestions typically involve daily brief practices, supplemented by weekly longer sessions that allow for deeper exploration and integration. The goal is consistency rather than intensity. 15 minutes of daily practice typically produces more transformation than sporadic longer sessions. The compounding effects develop as physical practices literally rewire your nervous system while creating what I call embodied confidence, a deep cellular knowing of your capacity to create change that extends far beyond the specific practices themselves. Over time, this develops into a fundamental shift in how you inhabit your body and move through space, which others unconsciously recognize and respond to as natural authority and magnetism. This isn't about performance or manipulation, but about the authentic power that emerges when consciousness and physicality work in integrated harmony rather than unconscious opposition. Understanding the psychology of implementation reveals why most transformation attempts fail and how to ensure your success in becoming a quantum magician. The journey from ordinary consciousness to reality creating mastery isn't merely about learning new techniques. It requires a fundamental identity transformation that dissolves the psychological structures that created your current limitations while birthing new structures that support extraordinary possibility. The process begins with recognizing that you are not a victim seeking to fix problems, but a creator learning to work consciously with the mysterious interface between mind and reality. This isn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing, it's a profound psychological shift that dissolves the artificial separation between inner and outer experience that keeps most people trapped in reactive rather than creative responses to life circumstances. When you truly embody this understanding, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this experience revealing about my unconscious programming, and how can I use this information to create more aligned results?" The certainty building involves understanding that transformation isn't a matter of if but when, because consciousness itself is the fundamental creative force in the universe. Every limitation you've experienced has been created by consciousness, which means consciousness can also dissolve and transform those limitations. The question isn't whether you have the power to change your reality. Quantum physics and depth psychology have definitively established that consciousness and reality are inextricably linked. The question is whether you're willing to do the psychological work required to access and apply this power consciously rather than unconsciously. Previous attempts may have failed because they operated from the ego's limited perspective rather than engaging the deeper psychological structures that actually determine manifestation. Most people try to change their lives while maintaining the same fundamental identity and belief systems that created their current circumstances. This is like trying to receive different radio programs while staying tuned to the same frequency. It violates basic principles of how consciousness and reality interface. Real transformation requires what I call psychological death and rebirth, the willingness to dissolve limiting identity structures and allow more authentic and powerful aspects of your nature to emerge. When you commit to this process, you will discover that reality itself becomes more responsive to your intentions. When you align your conscious desires with your unconscious programming through the integration work we've discussed, synchronicity begins occurring with increasing frequency and precision. When you embody the identity of someone who creates rather than merely reacts, opportunities and resources appear that were previously invisible. When you take consistent physical action aligned with your emerging vision, momentum builds in ways that often surprise even experienced practitioners. This isn't magic in the supernatural sense. It's the natural result of consciousness operating according to its fundamental principles rather than fighting against them through unconscious resistance and limitation. The urgency comes from recognizing that every day you postpone this transformation, you continue creating from unconscious programming inherited from childhood, society, and past experiences, rather than from your authentic creative potential. Every relationship, every financial decision, every health choice either reinforces limitation or expands possibility. There is no neutral ground. You are continuously creating your reality, whether you do it consciously or unconsciously. The only question is whether you're creating from fear and limitation or from love and infinite possibility. This brings us full circle to where we began, the recognition that what you call reality is actually a malleable creation of consciousness that responds to your deepest psychological programming rather than operating according to fixed immutable laws. The 5 methods I've shared aren't merely techniques, but pathways to remembering your fundamental nature as a conscious creator rather than a passive victim of circumstance. The moment you truly understand that your outer world reflects your inner world with mathematical precision, you begin the journey from ordinary consciousness to quantum magicry. You are not someone who needs to be fixed or improved, but a powerful creative force learning to work consciously with abilities you've always possessed but never learned to access deliberately. The quantum magician exists within you now, waiting to be discovered beneath layers of social conditioning and psychological protection mechanisms. Your willingness to engage this deeper truth determines whether you continue creating unconsciously from limitation or begin creating consciously from infinite possibility. The transformation begins the moment you decide that you are no longer willing to accept unconscious creation as your default mode of existence. Share in the comments below one limiting belief you're ready to dissolve and replace with empowering truth. What reality are you committed to creating when you fully embrace your identity as a quantum magician? Your journey into conscious reality creation starts now, not when conditions are perfect or when you feel fully prepared, but in this moment when you choose expansion over contraction, creation over reaction, and authentic power over learned helplessness.